She was born into a world that did not favor her, yet she carried herself with a gentleness that made others pause. From the moment her mother passed away, the village pitied her, but pity was not enough to shield her from the cruelty that followed. Her father, lost in his own despair, remarried a woman whose heart seemed carved from stone. Along with this stepmother came a daughter, sharp-tongued and bitter, who could not stand to see the orphan girl smile. Their household, once filled with warmth and song, turned into a place of scorn and endless commands. The young girl rose at dawn to fetch water, gathered firewood with blistered hands, and scrubbed pots until her knuckles cracked, yet she never complained. Her humility became her shield, though it also invited more mockery. Despite her worn clothes and the roughness of her chores, the girl's beauty was undeniable. Her skin glowed like polished bronze under the sun, her eyes carried a quiet kindness, and her movements were graceful even when she bent over menial tasks. Villagers often whispered about her charm, but admiration turned quickly into gossip, and gossip fanned the flames of jealousy within her stepsister. The stepsister could not bear to be compared, for no matter how finely she dressed or how much jewelry she wore, she could not match the natural grace of the orphan girl. That envy grew sharp and poisonous, feeding her cruelty. Every stumble, every misstep, was met with laughter, and every sign of resilience only made them despise her more. Among all her possessions, the girl owned only one item of true value, a pair of shoes her late mother had gifted her before she died. They were simple, made of worn leather, but to the girl they carried the memory of love, the warmth of a mother's touch, and the promise that she was not entirely forgotten in this world. She kept them polished as best as she could, treating them like treasures though others saw them as nothing but shabby footwear. Whenever she slipped them on, she felt her mother's presence, as though the shoes connected her to a love that even death could not steal. When she walked in them, she felt less alone, as if her steps carried echoes of her mother's blessings. The stepmother and stepsister noticed the affection she held for those shoes, and their hearts twisted further with envy. They mocked her for clinging to such an old thing, calling her foolish for treating them like gold. Yet the girl never answered with anger. Instead, she lowered her eyes and continued her tasks, whispering silent prayers of gratitude that she had at least one reminder of her mother's care. Each time she bent down to slip them on, she remembered her mother's last words, urging her to remain kind even when the world was cruel. That memory gave her strength to endure the endless taunts and the loneliness that filled her nights. But in the quiet corners of her heart, sorrow lingered. She longed for comfort, for a family that would love her as she had once known. She longed to walk through the village without whispers following her or laughter cutting into her pride. Yet even in her longing, she carried herself with dignity. She believed, with all the innocence she had left, that patience and goodness would one day be rewarded. And so, every day she put on her shoes, tied them carefully, and stepped into the harshness of her world, her bare spirit cloaked in grace, unaware that those very shoes would soon become the spark of a tale that would echo long after her suffering was done. The stepmother's favoritism was as clear as the sun in the sky. From the day she entered the house, she treated her own daughter as if she were royalty, showering her with trinkets, fine clothes, and the choicest portions of food. Every market trip ended with new fabrics or ornaments for the stepsister, while the orphan girl was given nothing more than leftover rags or worn-out tools for her chores. When the stepsister wanted water, the girl was ordered to fetch it. When the stepsister tired of grinding grain, the pestle was shoved into the orphan's hands. If the stepsister so much as frowned, the girl was blamed and punished without question. The household ran on the whims of the favored child, and the stepmother seemed blind to anything but her daughter's satisfaction. The stepsister thrived in this unfairness, flaunting her privilege at every chance. She walked through the village draped in bright beads and jingling bracelets, each step a declaration of her mother's indulgence. When villagers glanced at her with admiration, she turned their eyes back toward her orphan stepsister with ridicule. "Look at her," she would say loudly, still clinging to her dead mother's shoes as if they were gold. Her laughter was sharp and cruel, echoing in the girl's ears long after the moment had passed. The girl, dressed in patched-up cloth and burdened with endless chores, could not defend herself. She lowered her head, endured the mockery, and let her silence be her shield. Yet even her silence angered them, for it was a quiet defiance that revealed their own ugliness. The contrast between the two sisters grew heavier each day, feeding jealousy like fire fed with dry grass. The stepsister, surrounded by excess, still could not match the natural grace of the girl who lived in rags. Even without fine clothes or jewels, the orphan's presence drew admiration. Her kindness made her beloved among children, her hard work respected by elders, and her beauty noted in whispers she never asked for. This only deepened the resentment in her stepsister's heart. No amount of ornaments could hide the bitterness that twisted her face when she saw how the girl shone despite everything. And so, every act of favoritism, every cruel insult, every deliberate humiliation became another spark in a simmering tension that promised to explode one day. The village was buzzing with excitement when the chief's messenger arrived, beating a drum and shouting the news. There would be a grand festival at the end of the week. It was to honor the ancestors and celebrate the harvest, and everyone was invited. There would be dancing in the moonlight, drums echoing through the night, and stalls filled with food and bright fabrics. Merchants would come from faraway places, carrying beads, spices, and ornaments no villager had seen before. 4 days people talked of nothing else, preparing clothes and saving coins for the market. Children sang songs about the coming feast, while elders planned which animals to slaughter for the communal meal. The festival was the kind of event that stitched the whole village together, and missing it would be like missing a heartbeat. The orphan girl, hearing the announcement from the corner of the yard where she was sweeping, felt her heart lift with longing. She imagined walking among the people, hearing the drums, and tasting the sweet roasted yam she had smelled in years past. Yet as soon as she looked down at her feet, her joy faltered. Her only pair of shoes, the treasured gift from her late mother, were worn thin from years of use. The leather had softened and cracked, and though she polished them with care, they no longer looked fit for a festival. Still, they were all she had. She touched them gently that night, whispering to herself that perhaps it would be enough just to walk quietly at the edge of the crowd, to see the lights and hear the laughter. The stepsister, however, saw the festival as another chance to remind the world of her place above the orphan. From the moment she heard the announcement, she began boasting to her friends about what she would wear: the newest beads her mother had bought, the brightest cloth from the market, and shoes polished until they shone like mirrors. She walked around the house preening, already practicing her festival strut. Whenever she noticed the orphan watching quietly, she smirked and said, "You? At the festival? With what? Those rags you call clothes? Those pitiful shoes that look like they were dug out of the earth." Her laughter was harsh, meant to wound, and each insult was sharpened by her mother's approving smile. Behind her cruel words was a plan. The stepsister decided that if the orphan dared to appear at the festival, she would humiliate her before the whole village. She whispered to her mother about tricks they could play, perhaps splashing mud on her clothes before she left, perhaps making her fetch water until she was too late to prepare. But in her heart, the stepsister dreamed of something crueler still. She wanted to take those precious shoes, the last gift from the girl's mother, and make her walk barefoot to the festival, where all could laugh at her misery. She imagined the villagers sneering, whispering, and pointing as the girl stood ashamed in the dust. The thought made her laugh with satisfaction, certain that the festival would be her stage to destroy whatever dignity the orphan had left. The girl, unaware of the full extent of her stepsister's malice, clung to her quiet hope. She told herself that even if she was mocked, she would still walk to the festival, if only to honor her mother's memory by wearing the shoes she had left her. She did not know that envy was already working in secret against her, setting the stage for the cruelty that would soon change everything. The morning of the festival dawned bright, with the air full of anticipation. Drums echoed from the distant square, and women's voices carried as they sang while preparing food. Children ran barefoot through the dusty paths, laughing, while men decorated the gathering ground with palm leaves and woven cloth. The orphan girl woke early, her heart beating with both nervousness and hope. She took her time washing at the stream, then returned to the house where she carefully lifted her mother's shoes from their hiding place. They were old, yes, worn from years of wear, but they were hers and they carried the memory of her mother's love. She polished them with a soft cloth, whispering to herself, "I will honor you today, Mama. I will walk with my head high." But even as she bent over the shoes, the stepsister was watching. Jealousy burned in her heart at the thought of the orphan daring to show herself among the villagers. She should know her place, she muttered, and a cruel idea took root in her mind. When the orphan went outside to fetch water, the stepsister darted into the room, snatched the shoes and slipped them onto her own feet. They were a little small for her, but she didn't care. She admired herself in the mirror, giggling at the sight. "Now the precious shoes are mine," she said. When the orphan returned and saw her stepsister standing proudly in the yard with the shoes on, her heart dropped into her stomach. "Please, those are mine," she said softly, her voice trembling. "They were my mother's gift. Give them back." The stepsister laughed, a sharp, mocking sound. "Yours? Look at you, barefoot and pitiful. Shoes this fine deserve someone who will be seen, not someone who hides in corners like a shadow. I'll wear them to the festival, and everyone will see how beautiful they look on me. She spun around in the yard, making sure the neighbors who were already passing on their way to the square saw her. "Look at my new shoes," she shouted, pointing at her own feet. "Do they not shine on me? Better than being wasted on a barefoot beggar." Laughter rose from a few villagers, though others turned away uncomfortably. They had long known the cruelty of the stepmother and her daughter but feared to intervene. The stepmother herself appeared at the door, clapping her hands in approval. "My daughter looks like a true queen," she declared. "As for the other one, she can stay here where she belongs. Bare feet will remind her she is nothing." The orphan felt heat rising in her chest, not from anger but from shame. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall where her stepsister could see. She turned her gaze downward, staring at the dust under her bare feet. The world seemed to spin with laughter and taunts, but she steadied herself. She knew her mother's spirit was watching, and she would not dishonor that memory with begging. She stood quietly, letting the storm of mockery pass over her. As the stepsister paraded proudly toward the festival grounds, lifting her skirt so the shoes would be visible, whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Some pitied the orphan, barefoot and left behind, but none dared speak against the favored child of the household. The girl, however, lifted her chin and stepped onto the same path, her bare feet pressing into the warm earth. Each step stung with humiliation, yet each step also carried a strange resolve. She would not let shame keep her from the festival. She would walk barefoot, if only to show that no cruelty could keep her hidden forever. The laughter followed her as she walked, but beneath the laughter was something else, a quiet, unseen power waiting to reveal itself. The girl took her first steps onto the path leading to the festival, the dust warm beneath her bare feet. Every villager she passed turned to look, some with pity, others with mocking grins, but she kept her eyes steady on the road ahead. Each stone pressed sharply against her skin, each thorn that pricked her toes tempted her to stop, but she refused. The shoes had been taken from her, but not her will. She thought of her late mother's words, always urging her to walk with dignity, no matter how heavy the burden. As she moved along, the ground became uneven, patches of mud sucking at her feet, pulling her down as though to shame her further. Children pointed and whispered, "Look, she has no shoes. The beggar girl is going to the festival barefoot." Their laughter stung, but she did not scold them. She simply walked on, the rhythm of her steps steady, her breathing calm as though each step was a prayer. The stones grew sharper on the narrow stretch of road leading up to the village square. At times she winced, her body jerking from the sudden stab of pain, but she pressed her lips together and continued. She would not give her stepsister the satisfaction of seeing her broken. Her bare feet grew dusty and scratched, but her posture remained tall, her gaze unwavering. For her, each step was more than a walk, it was defiance. The shoes might have been stolen, but the road was still hers to travel. She refused to let cruelty stop her from reaching the festival. Step by step, through the pain of stones, through the sting of thorns, through the mud that clung to her, she moved forward. By the time she saw the colorful decorations of the square ahead, she felt as though her feet carried not just her body, but her spirit as well. At first, the girl herself did not notice it. She was too focused on keeping her steps steady, too busy ignoring the sting of stones and the whispers that followed her. But then, with one careful step on a patch of hard ground, something unusual flickered faintly beneath her foot. A soft shimmer, like the glint of morning sunlight on water, lingered for the briefest of moments before fading. She paused, thinking perhaps her eyes had deceived her, but when she lifted her foot and set it down again, a faint golden spark appeared and scattered across the dust. The air seemed to shift around her. A pair of small birds, perched on a nearby tree, chirped excitedly and fluttered down to the ground where her foot had touched. They hopped about as though searching for seeds, but instead of food, they pecked curiously at the faint glow that was already fading into the soil. The girl tilted her head, puzzled, her heart beating faster. She had never seen such a thing before, yet somehow it did not frighten her. As she continued walking, she began to notice more of it. With each step, tiny golden flecks broke free from the earth, sparkling like crushed stars. Sometimes they lingered just long enough to be noticed, dancing briefly in the sunlight before vanishing. Other times they glowed faintly in the dirt as though marking her path. A rabbit darted from the bushes to sniff at the trail she left, its nose twitching in delight before it bounded after her. Some villagers passing by noticed the shimmer too, but they only scoffed. "It is nothing," one man muttered, waving his hand dismissively. "The sun plays tricks on the eyes at this time of day." Another shook his head and spat into the dust. Even barefoot beggars can seem magical when one is too easily fooled. They returned to their chatter, pretending they had not seen anything at all, but their uneasy glances betrayed their doubt. The girl, meanwhile, pressed on, not yet realizing the strangeness of what was happening. She only knew that the burden of her pain felt lighter somehow, as if the earth itself softened where she stepped. Each sparkle gave her comfort, a quiet reminder that though she had been stripped of shoes, dignity and kindness, there was still something walking with her, something unseen yet powerful. Behind her, more animals began to follow. A stray dog padded along, sniffing curiously at the glowing dust. Birds wheeled above her in slow, circling arcs, their wings catching the sunlight. The villagers who had first dismissed the shimmer now found it harder to ignore. Whispers started to grow, hushed voices wondering if the girl truly walked with a blessing. But for now they still told themselves it was nothing more than a trick of the light, a strange coincidence, nothing to take seriously. Yet the sparks kept appearing step after step, a quiet miracle unfolding on the very path where cruelty had tried to shame her. With every step she took now, the faint sparks that had once flickered beneath her feet deepened into something undeniable. What had been mere glimmers grew brighter, stretching into streaks of golden dust that clung to the ground and shimmered under the rising sun. The road behind her no longer looked like a simple dirt path, it gleamed as though the earth itself had been painted in molten light. The trail followed her faithfully, marking every place her bare feet touched, glowing softly and refusing to fade. The girl noticed it at last. She slowed her pace and turned her head, her eyes widening at the brilliance left behind her. She lifted her foot and placed it down again, watching in awe as another bloom of golden radiance appeared, stretching into the trail. Her heart thudded in her chest, a mixture of wonder and disbelief. She had nothing, no shoes, no protection, no wealth, but her very steps were leaving behind riches the world could not ignore. It wasn't long before others began to see it too. A pair of young boys running to the festival with baskets of grain stopped mid-stride. Their mouths dropped open as they pointed at the shining road forming in her wake. One of them whispered, "It's gold, she's leaving gold." Soon a group of women carrying pots slowed to a halt, staring with wide eyes. They placed their burdens down and bent to touch the glowing dust, only for it to scatter like sunlight through their fingers. Word spread quickly along the road. Farmers stopped leading their goats, traders forgot their wares, children ceased their games. All eyes turned toward the girl who walked barefoot with a growing trail of brilliance behind her. The earlier scoffs and dismissals began to falter as more villagers gathered to see for themselves. The road where she had passed was no ordinary earth anymore. It shone brightly, marking her journey as though declaring her chosen by powers beyond human understanding. Some villagers gasped aloud, clutching their mouths in disbelief. "This is no trick of the sun," one elder muttered, leaning heavily on his staff as he gazed at the path. "The ancestors themselves are walking with her." Others exchanged nervous glances, murmuring prayers under their breath, fearful of what it might mean. A few stepped closer, trying to catch a handful of the glittering dust, but it slipped through their grasp, leaving nothing but ordinary dirt once the glow faded. Still the girl walked, her face calm though her heart raced. She did not strut or boast, though she knew she was carrying something extraordinary with her. Each golden trail she left behind seemed to silence the laughter and mockery that had once followed her. The very villagers who had sneered at her barefoot misery now stood frozen, watching her with awe as though she had become something untouchable. The path to the festival had never looked so radiant. And now, wherever she stepped, she carried not shame but light. The festival grounds were alive with the thrum of drums, the sweet scent of roasted yams, and the colorful fabrics swaying in the breeze. Villagers bustled about, laughing and trading, their joy filling the air like birdsong. But as the girl entered barefoot, every sound seemed to falter. The laughter dimmed, the rhythm of drums slowed, and eyes turned toward the glittering trail she left behind. With each step, her dusty feet pressed into the earth, and the ground shimmered with a burst of gold dust, spreading like a carpet that refused to fade. At first people thought their eyes deceived them. "What is this?" whispered a woman carrying a basket of fruit. "Do you see it too?" asked another, her mouth agape. Children gasped and began chasing the golden dust, scooping handfuls into their palms only to watch it dissolve into light. Men paused mid-conversation, their jaws slack, and even the elders stood still, leaning on their staffs in reverent silence. The girl walked steadily, her face calm though her heart beat fast. She had expected to be ridiculed for coming barefoot, but instead she was surrounded by awe. Every step drew more people behind her, following the shining path as if it were guiding them to a sacred place. Then the stepsister, dressed in her finest cloth, saw her. At once, her face twisted with disbelief. She had stolen the shoes, eager to mock the girl's bare feet before the whole village. Yet here the girl stood, barefoot but glowing, drawing all the admiration she had wanted for herself. "No, it cannot be," she hissed, clutching the stolen shoes tightly to her chest. She tried to laugh it off, her voice shrill. "She is only playing tricks. It is dust from the road, nothing more." But no one listened. The stepmother, who had paraded her daughter proudly earlier, felt the weight of humiliation settle on her shoulders. Her lips trembled as she muttered, How is this possible?" The villagers turned their gazes toward her and her daughter, their judgment heavy. Whispers rose like smoke. They mocked her, yet look who carries the blessing of the spirits. The girl reached the heart of the festival where the drummers sat, and without a word she stopped. The golden dust swirled around her feet, glowing brighter under the sun. The villagers bowed their heads slightly, recognizing that this was no ordinary child. Some knelt outright, believing she had been chosen. The musicians, inspired, struck their drums again, not with the festive rhythm they had played before, but with a deep, reverent beat, echoing like the pulse of the earth. The stepsister tried to force laughter once more, strutting forward in the girl's stolen shoes. "See? Our the finest shoes. She has nothing," she cried desperately, stomping the ground. But no gold appeared beneath her steps, only dust and dirt clinging to her soles. The people chuckled bitterly at the sight, shaking their heads. "Shoes of leather fade," an elder said softly, "but blessings walk barefoot." Shame washed over the stepmother and stepsister as the girl stood radiant without a single jewel or cloth to her name. Her bare feet, once mocked, had become the source of wonder. The people no longer saw her as the neglected orphan. They saw her as one touched by the unseen powers, a girl whose suffering had turned into glory. And so, in the middle of the festival, the girl's quiet dignity outshone the wealth and pride of those who scorned her. The stepmother and stepsister could only watch, trembling, as the villagers circled around her in admiration, the golden trail still glowing as if the earth itself rejoiced in her presence. The hush that had fallen over the festival was unlike anything the villagers had ever known. It was not the silence of fear, nor the quiet of exhaustion, but the stillness that comes when people stand in the presence of something beyond their comprehension. All eyes fixed on the barefoot girl whose path shimmered like the sun caught in dust, whose calm face seemed to glow though she wore no jewelry, no fine cloth, and no sandals. Then, like a wave, voices began to rise. "She has walked through pain, yet her steps leave beauty behind. Surely the ancestors walk with her. She is no ordinary child, she is blessed." The murmurs turned to shouts of praise as villagers pushed closer to see her. Women carrying water jars set them down and clapped their hands together in rhythm, singing songs of joy. Men bowed their heads, offering words of respect. Even the children who had once teased her for her ragged clothes, danced around her glowing trail, laughing and calling her sister of gold. The girl lowered her gaze shyly and used to such attention. Her life had been a constant battle with neglect and cruelty. Praise was foreign to her. Yet in her humility, the villagers only saw greater proof of her blessing. For she did not boast or raise her chin in pride. She stood quietly, her eyes wet with disbelief, as if she herself could not understand why the earth rejoiced beneath her feet. At that moment, the elders of the village, cloaked in their long robes and carrying their carved staffs, stepped forward. They had watched in silence until now, weighing the meaning of what their eyes beheld. The oldest among them, his face lined with years and wisdom, raised his staff high and called for the drums to cease. "People of the village," he said, his voice trembling with reverence, "we stand in the shadow of a mystery. This child, despised by some, has been chosen by powers greater than ours. Where others step, the earth yields only dust. But where she steps, the ground turns to gold. Tell me, is this not a sign?" The crowd erupted, voices joining as one. "It is a sign. It is a blessing." The elder turned toward the girl, his eyes kind. "Child, you have endured hardship without bitterness, walked barefoot without complaint, and yet your suffering has been turned into glory. You are a vessel of the ancestors' favor. From this day no one shall mock your rags, for the ground itself clothes you in honor." Tears welled in the girl's eyes as she dropped to her knees. "I am unworthy," she whispered. But the elder shook his head firmly. "Humility makes you worthy all the more." Around them, the villagers began chanting her name, their voices rising with respect. Mothers pressed their children forward, urging them to touch the glowing trail for blessing. Traders offered gifts of fruit, cloth, and coins, setting them at her feet as tokens of gratitude. The air, once filled with festival laughter, now thrummed with reverence. Meanwhile, the stepsister, who had paraded in stolen shoes, felt her pride crumble into dust. She stood stiff, her face flushed, clutching the shoes that no longer seemed precious. The shoes that once promised power and beauty now felt like chains in her hands. Each time she looked at her stepsister, radiant without them, shame coiled tighter around her heart. She tried to speak, to defend herself, but her words caught in her throat. No one was listening. The villagers who once flattered her for her mother's wealth now turned their backs. Their eyes held only contempt, as if her arrogance had been exposed under the golden light. The stepmother, too, shrank beneath the crowd's judgment. All her years of cruelty, her favoritism, her pride in her daughter, lay bare before the village. She had clothed her own child in wealth and scorned the orphan, but the ancestors had reversed her schemes. Her lips trembled as she muttered excuses, but the villagers shook their heads. "Your pride has blinded you," one woman said coldly. "You raised your child in arrogance, and now both of you bow in shame." The girl, sensing their shame though she had no desire for revenge, lowered her head again. She did not speak a word of accusation. Her silence carried more weight than any insult could. The villagers saw this and their respect deepened. "See how she spares even those who wronged her," they murmured. "Her spirit is pure. That is why the ancestors walk with her." The elders then raised their hands for quiet once more. "From this day forward," the chief elder declared, "this girl shall be honored among us. She shall have a place at our feasts, a voice in our gatherings, and protection in our walls. No one shall strip her dignity again, for the ancestors themselves have clothed her in gold." The crowd cheered, voices echoing across the village like thunder. The girl trembled, overwhelmed, her heart swelling with both gratitude and disbelief. For the first time in her life she was not invisible, not mocked, not despised. She was seen, truly seen and cherished. The stepsister, standing alone with her stolen shoes, dropped them at last. They landed in the dirt with a hollow thud, forgotten by all. She lowered her head, her arrogance shattered, and felt the sting of a truth she could no longer deny. Wealth without kindness was worthless, pride without humility was shame. And so, the barefoot girl, once a shadow in her own home, became a figure of respect in her village. Not because she sought power, nor because she wore riches, but because the ancestors had chosen her humility to reveal their glory. The golden trail beneath her feet was not merely magic. It was a testimony that resilience, patience, and purity of heart outshine every jewel and every shoe. The festival grounds still hummed with the echoes of admiration for the barefoot girl. Villagers lingered near her golden trail, whispering blessings, singing songs, and touching the dust as though it were sacred. But not far away the stepsister stood frozen, her heart pounding with humiliation. The shoes she had stolen, once paraded as her prize, now felt like curses burning her hands. Every time she looked down at them, she felt as if they mocked her, reminding her of the greed and spite that had been revealed before the entire village. Still, desperate not to be forgotten, she tried to force her way back into the center of attention. She lifted the stolen shoes high into the air and shouted, "Look at me! These are mine. My steps are finer than hers. She is just a barefoot girl. Why do you praise her while I hold beauty in my hands?" Her voice cracked as she tried to summon confidence, but the villagers only turned and looked at her with disdain. "Those are not your shoes," a woman muttered sharply. "She stole them," another hissed. "Why should we honor deceit when the ancestors themselves honor humility?" an elder asked, shaking his head. The stepsister's words withered under their judgment. Her eyes darted nervously as the crowd began murmuring louder, dismissing her as a jealous child blinded by arrogance. She stomped her foot, desperate to command their attention, but her tantrum only made her look smaller, pettier. The shoes in her hands no longer glowed with worth. They seemed dull, useless compared to the golden path her sister had created with nothing but her bare feet. A heavy heat crept up her cheeks, burning with shame. She realized then for the first time that no amount of silk or jewelry could hide her cruelty. It was as if the golden dust had not only lit the earth but also exposed her heart for all to see. And it was ugly. She could feel the weight of every insult she had thrown at her sister, every laugh at her pain, every moment of mockery. Now it all returned to her like sharp stones in her chest. She tried once more to strut across the festival grounds, holding her head high and forcing a smile, but the villagers turned their backs. No one clapped. No one admired. No one cared. She walked through the crowd like a ghost, invisible except for the whispers that followed her. That is the one who mocked her sister. That is the thief. That is the one the ancestors have shamed. Her arrogance cracked like clay under a heavy rain. Inside she was crumbling, but outside she forced her body to keep moving, to keep pretending. Yet each step felt heavier than the last. The shoes, once her trophies, became unbearable in her hands until, in a moment of despair, she hurled them onto the ground. They landed in the dust with a hollow thud, forgotten instantly as though they had never mattered. No one bent to pick them up. No one gasped at the loss. They were simply objects now, stripped of their false power. The girl's stepmother, watching from a distance, saw her daughter's shame unfold. A deep unease coiled in her stomach. Until this day she had always believed she controlled the narrative. Her daughter was the jewel, the shining one, the girl worth praising, while the orphan was nothing but a shadow to trample on. But now the roles had reversed before all eyes and she could not stop it. Worse, the villagers were speaking of the barefoot girl as chosen by the ancestors, a blessing too powerful to ignore. If the ancestors had truly chosen her, what would that mean for the stepmother? What punishment awaited a woman who had mocked, starved, and enslaved one of the blessed? Her throat tightened as fear seeped into her bones. She wanted to silence the whispers, to drag her stepdaughter home and end this humiliation, but she dared not move. The villagers' eyes were sharp, ready to judge, and the elders' words had already sealed the girl's honor as sacred. To challenge that now would be to challenge the ancestors themselves, and such a challenge could bring curses on her household. The stepsister slumped in defeat, her pride shattered. She could no longer meet anyone's gaze. For the first time she saw her sister not as weak, but as powerful in a way no wealth could match. That realization made her heart twist with bitterness. She had spent her life building her worth on appearances, on fine clothes and glittering ornaments, only to learn in one cruel afternoon that true beauty lay in kindness and endurance. She could not bear it. Her envy grew heavier, but she was powerless to fight it. Meanwhile, the barefoot girl, surrounded by villagers' songs, remained gentle and unboastful. She had not spoken a single word against her stepsister or stepmother. Her silence, her calm humility, only deepened the shame of those who had wronged her. For the more she showed grace, the clearer their cruelty appeared. That night, when the festival ended and the villagers returned to their homes, the stepmother and stepsister walked behind the barefoot girl in silence. No one greeted them, no one invited them to share food, no one offered smiles. Their pride had been stripped bare in public, and now they carried the invisible weight of disgrace. The stepsister's shame gnawed at her like hunger. Every whisper she heard in the darkness felt like a dagger. She is the chosen one. Her steps turned to gold. And in her heart, she knew she would never escape the shadow of that truth. The stepmother, though silent, was not just ashamed, she was afraid. For if the ancestors blessed the orphan, then perhaps they would curse those who had tormented her. The thought lodged in her chest like a thorn, and no matter how she tried to steady her breath, the fear would not leave. In that moment, both mother and daughter realized that the balance of power had shifted forever. The girl they had ridiculed and enslaved was no longer beneath them, she had been lifted far above. And there was nothing they could do to drag her back down. The stepsister stood frozen in the middle of the festival, her hands trembling as she clutched the shoes she had stolen. A few hours earlier, she had been filled with confidence, certain that taking her sister's only pair of shoes would humiliate her before the entire village. She had imagined people laughing with her, praising her beauty and mocking the barefoot orphan who trailed behind. But instead, all eyes now rested on the orphan, who had walked through dust and thorns barefoot and left trails of golden light with every step. The villagers surrounded her like worshippers at a shrine, singing praises, touching the ground where her feet had passed, and murmuring blessings as though she carried the ancestors' power. The stepsister could only watch, her chest tightening as she realized the laughter had turned on her. She tried desperately to seize back the attention. Lifting the shoes high, she shouted, "Look here! I am the one with the fine shoes. I am the one who deserves your praise, not her." Her voice cracked, shrill and desperate, but the crowd only turned their faces away. Murmurs spread quickly, "Those are not hers. She stole them." Another whispered sharply, "She mocked her sister, yet see how the ancestors raised the humble one instead." A few even spat on the ground near her feet, rejecting her arrogance. The stepsister's throat went dry. She tried to smile, to strut across the square as though she were still admired, but her feet felt heavy, her hands shook, and the shoes no longer gleamed like treasures. In that moment they seemed like nothing more than leather scraps, dull and powerless compared to the glowing dust that shimmered in her sister's trail. The weight of humiliation pressed down on her shoulders until she could barely lift her head. She realized with sudden clarity that her cruelty, her laughter, and her envy were no longer hidden. They had been dragged into the light for all to see, and the whole village now recognized her ugliness. Her face burned hot with shame, but her heart burned even hotter with bitterness. She had always believed her beauty, her mother's favoritism, and her wealth would secure her place above her sister. Now those very things felt meaningless. The more she tried to speak, the more hollow her words became. No one listened. No one cared. All attention was fixed on the barefoot girl, radiant and calm, who had spoken not a single word yet commanded the respect of the entire village. The stepmother, standing behind her daughter, felt her stomach twist into knots. Until that moment she had always believed she held power, over the orphan girl, over the household, even over how the villagers saw them. She had thought herself clever, using cruelty to keep the girl small and forgotten while elevating her own daughter. But as she watched the villagers bow their heads toward the barefoot girl, she felt her confidence crumble. Their whispers filled her ears like a swarm of bees. The ancestors have chosen her. Her steps are blessed. Beware the one who mocks the chosen. Fear lodged itself in the stepmother's chest. If the ancestors had truly marked the girl, then what punishment awaited those who had tormented her? She glanced nervously at her daughter, who was now visibly trembling, and for the first time she saw her child not as favored but as vulnerable. The blessing that shone around the orphan was like a mirror, reflecting their own cruelty back at them. The stepsister tried one final time to claim some dignity. She held out the shoes, forcing a smile, and cried, "These were mine all along. She has tricked you." But before anyone could reply, her hand faltered, and the shoes slipped from her grip. They fell into the dust with a lifeless thud. The crowd did not even flinch. No one rushed to pick them up, no one gasped at the loss. The shoes had lost all worth in the eyes of the people. What mattered now was not leather or wealth, but the golden trail that continued to glow behind the barefoot girl. The stepsister stared at the abandoned shoes in horror. They had once been her weapon of pride, the symbol of her victory over her sister. Now they were nothing more than a reminder of her own shame. Tears stung her eyes, but she swallowed them down, too stubborn to weep in public. Yet the humiliation clung to her like heavy chains, impossible to shake. As the villagers pressed closer to the barefoot girl, praising her endurance and calling her blessed, the stepsister's isolation grew unbearable. She could hear them whispering about her, every word cutting like a blade. She laughed at her sister's suffering. She stole from the orphan. And now the ancestors have shamed her. She wanted to run, to vanish into the crowd, but her feet refused to move. Her pride had built her up for years, and now it shattered in a single day, leaving her hollow and exposed. That night, when the festival ended, the villagers escorted the barefoot girl home with songs and blessings, leaving the stepmother and stepsister to trail behind in silence. No one offered them food. No one welcomed them. No one even looked at them with kindness. The stepmother's mind swirled with fear. If the ancestors had blessed the orphan, perhaps they had already cursed her household. The stepsister clutched her mother's arm as they walked, her shame still raw. She could not forget the way the villagers had looked at her, nor could she escape the truth that had been revealed. Her cruelty was exposed, and nothing she did could cover it again. She had mocked her sister's bare feet, but those very feet had carried the light of the ancestors. And in the glow of that light, she herself stood small, envious, and broken. For the first time in her life, the stepsister understood the depth of her folly. Yet the understanding brought no peace, only a heavy, gnawing shame that would not let her sleep, and a fear that her sister's blessing would mean her own downfall. The festival square had never witnessed such a moment. Where laughter once mocked her bare feet, now silence and awe filled the air. The villagers, young and old, pressed forward not to jeer but to honor. The barefoot girl, who had endured humiliation and cruelty, now walked in dignity, her every step leaving trails of gold that shimmered like sunlight caught in the earth itself. Children darted behind her, scooping the dust in their hands, marveling as it sparkled before vanishing like mist. To them it was proof of magic, proof that the ancestors themselves had chosen her. The elders were the first to step forward. Men with gray beards bowed their heads, women with lines of age on their faces bent their knees. One elder spoke softly, his voice trembling, "Child, you walked barefoot with humility, and the earth answered. We mocked your suffering, yet the spirits crowned you with honor. Forgive us, for we did not see." His words were met with nods from the crowd, and soon, gifts began to pour forth. A woman laid down a woven cloth dyed in bright colors. A farmer offered a basket of ripe yams, the first of his harvest. A herdsman placed a young goat at her feet, saying, This is yours, for you are blessed." The girl accepted nothing with greed. She bowed her head humbly, thanking them, her voice soft and calm. To her, the honor was not in the gifts themselves, but in the acknowledgement that her dignity, once trampled, now stood tall before all. Every act of generosity from the villagers felt like a wound healing, not for her alone, but for the truth they had all ignored when she was ridiculed. As she turned to leave the square, the path before her glowed brighter than ever. Her golden trail stretched like a ribbon, guiding her steps home. Children squealed with delight as they skipped along behind her, chanting songs they had begun to make up on the spot. Her feet shine with light. Her steps bless the earth. She walks with gold, she walks with honor. Even the elders, usually solemn, found themselves whispering prayers of gratitude as they followed. The stepsister and stepmother could only watch, their faces tight with fear and shame. Once they had been the center of admiration, strutting through the village with fine clothes and sharp tongues. But now their wealth seemed dull compared to the barefoot girl's radiance. Their voices, once loud, could not rise above the reverence in the air. The villagers no longer turned to them with respect. All eyes were on the girl whose feet glowed with gold. As the procession moved through the village, neighbors stepped out of their huts to watch. Each house the girl passed seemed to light up in spirit. People laid down tokens at her feet, not only food or fabric but beads, carvings and blessings whispered into the air. One woman with a sick child held the baby forward. The girl bent down, touching the child's hand, and though no miracle happened in that moment, the mother wept with gratitude, certain that a blessing had been passed on. The girl herself felt none of the pride that had consumed her stepsister. Her heart was steady, her mind clear. She knew that what the villagers saw was not simply her strength, but the justice of the ancestors shining through her. She walked slowly, carefully, ensuring that each step left a clear mark, as though to remind the people that humility carves its own path, brighter than jewels. When she finally reached her home, her path still glittering behind her, the villagers gathered outside. They asked her to speak, to say something that would explain her blessing. For a moment she stood in silence, her bare feet resting on the earth that glowed faintly beneath her. Then she spoke, "I asked for nothing but to walk in peace. My steps were mocked, my shoes were stolen, yet I did not turn back. The ancestors have shown that dignity cannot be taken by cruelty. This light is not mine alone, it is for all who endure with patience." Her words struck deep into the hearts of those who listened. Some bowed, others wept, and many felt their shame loosen as they accepted her truth. The girl did not curse her tormentors, nor boast of her power. She simply spoke with grace, reminding them that honor grows in silence, and that the earth itself remembers the steps of the humble. As the sun began to set, the golden trails she left behind did not fade entirely. They lingered faintly on the village paths, glowing in the twilight, as if the ground itself wished to preserve her walk as a reminder for generations to come. Children would later tell stories of running along those glowing paths, their laughter echoing into the night. Elders would tell the tale at gatherings, pointing to the very roads that still held traces of her light. And so, her return home was not the end of her humiliation, but the crown of her triumph. The girl who once ate her meals in silence, who bore cruelty without complaint, had become a figure of honor. Her steps were not just her own anymore, they were the steps of every orphan, every mocked child, every soul who had ever been despised for their simplicity. Through her they all walked with dignity. The villagers promised themselves they would never again mock the humble or envy the poor. But even more than their promises, it was the girl's shining trail that carried the lesson, etched into the earth itself. Wherever she walked, respect followed. Wherever her bare feet touched, the land sang with gold. The story of the barefoot girl did not end at the festival. What she left behind was not only the glittering trails of gold that shimmered in the dust but also a lesson that echoed in every corner of the village and beyond. By evening, when the festival was drawing to a close, people were still speaking of her name. Elders, mothers, fathers, children, and even travelers who had come from distant lands carried the tale back with them. The story spread quickly, like fire leaping from dry grass to dry grass, unstoppable and bright. Everywhere it was told, people marveled at the same truth, that humility, patience and resilience are greater adornments than jewels or fine clothes. The girl, who had been mocked, belittled and forced to live in shame by her own family, had walked barefoot into the heart of the village, and instead of disgrace she brought honor, not just to herself but to the entire community. Her golden footprints were not seen as mere magic. They were seen as signs, blessings from the ancestors, proof that the spirits had eyes even in the silence of suffering. The villagers repeated her journey as if it were a sacred chant. They spoke of the shoes that were stolen, the cruel laughter of her stepsister, and the calmness of the girl who chose not to weep or curse but to walk forward barefoot. They described how the first sparks appeared, faint and almost invisible, as if the ancestors were testing the strength of her heart. And then how those sparks grew into radiant trails of gold, undeniable to all who saw them, shining brighter with every step she took. The moral of the story became a teaching tool. Elders gathered children around evening fires and told them, "Mockery and cruelty only bring shame, but humility and grace bring blessings that outlive laughter." The stepsister, once so proud of her beauty and sharp tongue, now stood as a living warning. Whenever young people grew arrogant or tried to belittle others, the elders reminded them of the stepsister who thought she had won by stealing shoes, only to lose face before the entire village. The stepmother too could not escape the whispers. For years she had thought herself clever, hiding her cruelty behind authority and household rules. But the festival had revealed her truth, and she now walked with her head lowered, afraid of the very girl she had despised. The villagers no longer respected her. Mothers told their daughters, "Do not be like her." Her hands were quick to strike, but her heart was too blind to see the blessings in her own house. But the girl, the barefoot one, became more than a daughter or sister. She became a symbol. People began to call her, "the one who walks with gold," not because she sought riches, but because her spirit transformed pain into light. Merchants who traveled to other villages carried the tale, and soon strangers arrived just to see her. Some brought gifts not of pity but of honor, woven mats, beads, baskets, and food. Yet she accepted everything with the same humility with which she had walked barefoot, never boastful, never proud. She only thanked them and continued to live simply. The golden trails themselves faded with time, washed away by rains and footsteps. Yet the memory of them never disappeared. Children played games where they pretended to walk like her, lifting their feet carefully and saying, "See, the ground shines when I step." They laughed, but in their laughter was respect, for they knew it was not just a game. It was a reminder that even the smallest steps, when taken with patience, could leave lasting marks. Over time the tale became legend. It was no longer just about one girl and her stolen shoes. It became about the power of endurance, the silent strength of those who refuse to be broken, and the way blessings arrive when least expected. Some said that the ancestors had hidden the gold in the earth long ago, waiting for someone worthy to reveal it. Others said the girl's heart was so pure that it turned even dust into treasure. But no matter the explanation, the truth remained the same. Cruelty cannot dim the light of a patient soul. And so, whenever someone in the village felt mocked, belittled, or forced to endure suffering, they remembered her story. They reminded themselves, "The ground remembers the steps of the humble." Mothers comforted their daughters with it, fathers guided their sons with it, and elders spoke it as wisdom to anyone who would listen. The golden trails became a metaphor used in everyday life. A child who helped an elder was told, "Your steps will leave trails of gold." A young man who worked hard without complaint was praised, "You walk like the barefoot girl." And those who mocked or laughed at others were warned, "Be careful, your shame may follow you like the stepsister's shadow." In the end, the girl's greatest reward was not the gifts she received or the honor she was given. It was that her suffering had not been in vain. Her patience had turned into a lesson that lived on for generations. The golden trails were no longer on the ground, but in the minds and hearts of all who told her tale. And so the legend grew, carried by wind, by word, and by memory. That even when unnoticed, genuine kindness leaves a mark. That cruelty may shine for a moment, but its light dies in shame. That blessings walk quietly, and when they appear, they are brighter than gold. The girl who once had nothing, not even shoes, had given her people a treasure that could never be stolen.